Everything in this episode worked. That is what makes them different from the things we talked about last time. Nobody spilled anything. No batch was ruined. Every one of these was designed carefully by someone who knew what they wanted, and every one of them did exactly the job it was built to do. They are here because the job turned out to be the wrong one. A machine built to punish prisoners is now in every gym. A material bought by the ton to replace rubber is now sold as a sweet. A ride at the end of a pier is now how you get to the second floor of every shop in the world. Tonight we walk through 14 of them. They run from 1818 to 1957. In each case, somebody made a good thing for one reason, and somebody else, sometimes decades later, found the reason it was actually for. There is no rush in any of this. You do not have to follow every detail. If you are here to fall asleep, that is a perfectly good way to listen. We begin in a prison in England. The machine that was a punishment. In 1818, an English engineer named William Cubitt was asked to solve a problem in prisons. The problem, as the authorities saw it, was that prisoners were idle. Cubitt designed a large wheel. Prisoners stood on a row of steps set into its outer edge and held a bar above them. Their weight turned the wheel, and the wheel turned machinery. In some prisons it ground grain. In some, it pumped water. In a number of them, it was connected to nothing at all, and the men simply climbed for the sake of climbing. It was called the tread wheel, and later the treadmill. A man might climb the equivalent of several thousand feet in a day. It was hard, monotonous work, and that was the entire point. It was designed to be pointless. It spread through the prison system and stayed there for most of a century. Britain removed it from prisons by law in 1898, on the grounds that it was cruel. The idea sat quietly for decades after that. It came back in the 1960s, when doctors began using moving belts to test hearts under load, and then it came back again as something people bought for their homes. The machine is now a normal piece of furniture in a spare bedroom. The same motion, the same endlessness, the same going nowhere. The only thing that changed is that we choose it. A ton of chicle. Thomas Adams was a photographer and inventor in New York. In the 1860s, he came into contact with the exiled Mexican general Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who had an idea to sell. Santa Anna's idea was chicle. It is the dried sap of the sapodilla tree, and it had been chewed in Mexico for a very long time. His proposal was industrial. Rubber was expensive, and chicle might replace it. Adams bought a ton of the stuff and set to work. He tried to make toys from it. He tried masks. He tried rain boots. He tried bicycle tires. Every attempt failed. Chicle would not behave the way rubber behaves, and after months of experiments, he had a warehouse problem instead of a business. What he did next is the whole story. He had watched people chew it, so he boiled a small batch, rolled it, cut it into pieces, and put it in a drugstore to see what would happen. In 1871, he patented a machine for making the stuff in quantity, and Adams' New York gum went on sale at a penny apiece. The rubber substitute never worked. The company, built on the failure, became the largest chewing gum business in the country. Chicle itself was mostly replaced by synthetic bases in the last century, so the gum sold today usually contains none of the material that started it. The wax on the oil rigs. Robert Chasebro was a chemist in Brooklyn who made kerosene out of whale oil. When petroleum was struck in Pennsylvania, his trade was about to vanish, so he went to look at the oil fields himself. There he found the drillers complaining about a nuisance. A pale, sticky wax kept collecting on the pump rods and gumming up the machinery. They called it rod wax, and scraped it off as often as they could. They also told him something else. When they burned or cut themselves, they rubbed the rod wax on the injury, and it seemed to help. Chesbro took samples home and spent years purifying the stuff into a clean, odorless jelly. He patented the process in 1872. Then he had to sell it, and nobody wanted it, so he traveled around New York State giving demonstrations. He would burn his own skin in front of a crowd, spread the jelly over the burn, and show them older injuries he said had healed under the same treatment. It worked as salesmanship. Petroleum jelly went into medicine cabinets and stayed there. Modern advice on burns is different, and the jelly is not what a doctor would reach for now. But it is still made, still sold in the same shape of jar, and still mostly used for things nobody had in mind in 1872. Chapped lips, dry hands, and squeaking hinges. Rivets for men who dug. Jacob Davis was a tailor in Reno, Nevada. He made tents, wagon covers, and working clothes, and he bought his cloth from a dry goods merchant in San Francisco named Levi Strauss. A customer came to him with an ordinary complaint. Her husband wore out his trouser pockets. The corners gave way where the fabric was pulled hardest, and they gave way again every time they were mended. Davis had a box of copper rivets in his shop, the kind used on horse blankets. He put a rivet at each corner of the pockets. The trousers stopped tearing. Word spread among the miners and laborers around Reno quickly enough that Davis worried about being copied, and he did not have the money to file a patent alone. So he wrote to his cloth supplier and proposed they do it together. The patent was granted in 1873 to Davis and Strauss jointly. The product was workwear, plainly and only. It was sold to men who dug, hauled, and hammered, and it was advertised on how long it lasted. It stayed workwear for about 70 years. It became clothing for everyone else in the 1950s, largely because of films, and it has never gone back. The rivets are still there. On most jeans sold today, they hold together pockets that will never carry anything heavier than a phone. An antiseptic looking for a job. In the 1870s, the idea that surgeons should kill germs before operating was new and not universally accepted. Joseph Lister was its most famous advocate, and in the United States, a doctor named Joseph Lawrence set out to make a surgical antiseptic worthy of the name. He produced a formula built on essential oils, and it was named after Lister. Listerine was sold to the medical profession as something to clean wounds and sterilize instruments. It did that job for years. It was also, over time, offered as a floor cleaner, as a treatment for dandruff, and as a cure for a number of complaints it could not cure. The turn came in the 1920s. The company was owned by then by the Lambert family, and the advertising department took an obscure medical term for bad breath, halitosis, and built a campaign around it. The campaign did not sell a cure for a disease. It sold a worry. It told people that they might have something offensive about them, that their friends were too polite to mention. Sales rose from a few tens of thousands of dollars a year to several million inside a decade. The product in the bottle barely changed. What changed was the answer to the question of what it was for. It is still sold as mouthwash, and the surgical career it was designed for is over. A fastener for boots. Whitcomb Judson was an engineer in Chicago with a number of patents to his name, most of them concerning pneumatic street railways. The device he is remembered for was meant to solve a much smaller problem. High boots in the 1890s fastened with long rows of hooks and eyes. Doing them up took a while, and doing them up while bending over took longer. Judson designed a sliding clasp that would hook and unhook a whole row at once. He called it the clasp locker and showed it at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. Almost nobody bought it. It jammed. It sprang open. It was expensive to make, and a boot that opens by itself is worse than a boot that takes a minute. The design was carried forward by an engineer named Gideon Sunback, who spent years rebuilding it around interlocking teeth on a flexible tape. His version worked reliably, and the first large orders came for the military, for flying suits and money belts. The name came later from a rubber company that used the fastener on a line of galoshes and called them zippers, after the sound. Clothing was the last place it arrived, not the first. Trousers and dresses took it up in the 1930s. The boots it was designed for had moved on without it. The ride at the end of the pier. Jesse Reno was an American engineer with a large idea that never happened. He wanted to build a double-decker subway under New York, and he needed a way to move crowds between the levels without stairs. His answer was patented in 1892. He called it the inclined elevator. It was a belt of cast-iron slats running up a slope, with a moving handrail beside it, and a comb of metal fingers at each end to guide feet on and off. The subway was not built, so he installed the machine somewhere else. By the record kept at Guinness, it went up at the old iron pier at Coney Island in September 1895, and some sources give the following year. Either way, it was not transport, it was a ride. It rose about 7 feet, at a gentle angle, and people queued to go up it and come back down. Around 75,000 of them did so in a fortnight. It stayed a fortnight and came down again. But the parts that made it work, the moving handrail, the comb at each end, are the parts still used today. The machine that could not find a subway to serve is now in nearly every department store, airport, and railway station on Earth, doing quietly the exact job it was designed for. A game meant as a warning. Elizabeth Magie was an American writer, poet, and stenographer, and a follower of the economist Henry George. George argued that private ownership of land was the root of a great deal of poverty. Magie thought this was hard to explain in an argument and easier to show in a game. She designed a board where players moved around a square track, bought property, and charged each other rent for landing on it. As the game went on, one player accumulated everything, and the rest were slowly ruined. That was not a flaw, that was the demonstration. She patented it in 1904 as the landlord's game, and it came with 2 sets of rules. One where land grabbing ran unchecked, and one where the proceeds were shared, so that players could compare the 2 outcomes for themselves. The teaching game spread by copying. It was played in colleges, redrawn by hand, and passed between households for 30 years, and along the way, the second set of rules quietly fell out of use. A version of it was sold to Parker Brothers in the 1930s. Magie's own patent was bought for $500. The game is now the best-selling board game in the world, and it is played for the pleasure of bankrupting your family. The lesson survived. The moral was lost somewhere in the middle. A replacement for Beetle resin. Shellac is made from a resin secreted by an insect on trees in India and Thailand. In the early 1900s, it was in demand as an electrical insulator, and supplying an industrial world from an insect was becoming difficult. Leo Baekeland, a Belgian chemist working in New York, went looking for a synthetic substitute. He had money and time, having already sold a photographic paper invention for a large sum. He worked with phenol and formaldehyde. Others had tried the same pair before and produced hard, useless masses that cracked and could not be shaped. Baekeland's contribution was control. He built a heavy pressure vessel and worked out what heat and what pressure would let him stop the reaction where he wanted it. The result, announced in 1907, was hard, did not conduct electricity, did not soften when warm, and could be molded to any shape. It went into the places he intended: switches, sockets, distributor caps. Then it went everywhere else: radios, telephones, kitchen handles, clocks, cameras, and, in enormous quantity, jewelry. Its warm, dark colors became the look of the 1920s and 30s. Bakelite is the first fully synthetic plastic, and it is the reason nearly everything around you now is made from something that has never existed in nature. The bag was the packaging. Thomas Sullivan was a tea merchant in New York. Like most merchants of his time, he sent samples to his customers in small tins. By the usual version of the story, in about 1908, he decided to save money and sent the samples in small hand-sewn silk bags instead. The bag was a container. The customer was expected to open it and use the leaves. His customers did not open them. They dropped the whole bag into hot water, because that was obviously easier, and then they wrote back asking for more of the bags. This is the traditional account, and it is worth saying that it is disputed. A patent for a tea holder made of stitched mesh was granted in 1903 to two women in Milwaukee, Roberta Lawson and Mary Mullerin, several years before Sullivan's samples. Their design did not sell. What is not disputed is which version of the object survived. Silk gave way to gauze, and gauze to paper. The rectangular two-chamber bag came in the 1940s. Most of the tea drunk in Britain and America today is drunk out of a bag, and the bag is no longer packaging in any sense. It is part of the brewing equipment, thrown away wet, and the tins it was meant to replace are the collector's items. Filters for gas masks. During the First World War, cotton was needed for surgical dressings and was in short supply. A paper company in Wisconsin developed a substitute made from processed wood pulp. It was absorbent, cheap, and could be produced in quantity. They called it Celicotton. It went to the front as wound dressing, and it was also used as a filter material inside gas masks. When the war ended, the company had a great deal of manufacturing capacity and no war to supply. They spent several years looking for something civilian to do with the material. The first answer, in 1924, was a disposable sheet for removing cold cream. It was sold as a beauty product to women for taking makeup off, and it was named Kleenex. Then the letters started arriving. Customers wrote to say they were using the sheets for something else entirely. They were blowing their noses into them. The company ran a survey, and the survey said the same thing. In the 1930s, the advertising was rewritten around the handkerchief you throw away. The material was invented for a war, sold for a cosmetic, and is now on the bedside table of anyone with a cold. Very little about the sheet itself has changed in 100 years. A bed, borrowed from the circus. George Neeson was a competitive gymnast at the University of Iowa. He watched trapeze artists at a circus and noticed what they did after the act was over. They bounced on the safety net and used it to add a few tricks for the crowd. He thought the net was more interesting than the trapeze. With his coach, Larry Griswold, he built a frame of angle iron in a garage, stretched canvas across it, and held the canvas with springs. The prototype came together in the mid-1930s. It was training equipment for tumblers, and nothing more. The military found it during the Second World War. A trampoline turned out to be a good way to teach a pilot how to work out which way up he was after a hard maneuver. Later, the space programs used them for the same reason. Nissan spent decades promoting it. He took a trampoline to Central Park and photographed a kangaroo standing on the reasoning that a photograph of a kangaroo goes further than a press release. It became an Olympic sport in the year 2000. And it became something else as well, which was never the plan. A large round thing in a back garden, with a net around it, used by children who have never heard of a trapeze. The 40th Attempt. In 1953, a small company in San Diego was working on an unglamorous problem for the aerospace industry: metal rusts, and a missile sitting in the open with a thin skin is a missile with a corrosion problem. The company was called Rocket Chemical, and it had 3 employees. They were looking for a compound that would displace water from a metal surface so that what remained had nothing to corrode with. They kept notes by number. The 39th attempt was not right. The 40th was, and the name is simply the shorthand from the laboratory book. Water Displacement Formula 40. It went onto the outer skin of the Atlas missile and did the job. Then the employees started taking cans home. There was no rule against it, and the stuff turned out to be extremely useful on hinges, locks, bicycle chains, and anything seized with rust. The company noticed. In 1958, it went on sale to the public in an aerosol can, and within a few years the household product had entirely overtaken the aerospace contract that paid for its development. The formula has never been patented, because a patent would have required publishing it. It has stayed a trade secret for over 70 years, and it is now in something like 4 out of 5 homes in America. Pie tins on a lawn. The Frisbee Pie Company of Bridgeport, Connecticut sold pies. Its tins were light, round, and had a raised rim, and students at colleges in the area discovered that a tin thrown flat will fly a long way and land upright. The habit spread across campuses in the 1940s. It had no equipment budget and no inventor. It had a pie company and a lawn. Separately, a Californian named Walter Frederick Morrison had been making flying discs out of plastic since the late 40s, selling them at fairs. His best design was molded in 1955 and called the Pluto Platter, because flying saucers were the thing that year. The toy company Wham-O bought the rights in 1957. The following year, hearing about the students and their pie tins, they changed the name to Frisbee. The pie company had closed by then. It never made a penny from the toy, and the spelling was altered just enough to be a trademark. The disc is now an Olympic-adjacent sport, a beach object, a thing thrown for dogs, and a standard item in a park. The pies it started as have been out of production for over 60 years. That is 14 of them. There is a pattern in these stories, and it is worth saying plainly before you go. In every one of them the thing worked. The rivets held. The wheel turned. The antiseptic killed germs. The chicle would not become a bicycle tire, but it did everything else asked of it. What nobody could see in advance was who would want it, and for what. That gap is usually decades long. A tailor's rivet took 70 years to become ordinary clothing. A prison machine took a century and a half to become something people buy for themselves. A game about the unfairness of rent became the most popular way in the world to spend an evening pretending to be a landlord. None of these people were wrong about their invention. They were only early and pointed slightly to one side. If you are still awake, the objects are all around you. Almost none of them are being used for the reason they exist. Sleep well.